Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a mother and became just a checkbook. I realized it the moment I heard my son Michael say those words through his fiancée's phone, the one he'd accidentally left on speaker while I was in the kitchen making them lunch. "Don't worry, babe. Mom will pay for whatever we want. She always does. We just won't tell her about the seating arrangement until after she's wired the money." I stood there with a sandwich knife in my hand, mayonnaise dripping onto the counter, and felt something inside me crack. Not break crack, like ice on a lake in early spring, the kind that looks solid but you know won't hold your weight much longer. It had been 3 weeks since Michael first asked me about the wedding. He'd driven down from Charlotte with Madison, his fiancée of 6 months, and they'd sat in my living room with spreadsheets and Pinterest boards and a look of such earnest hope that I'd already known what was coming. "Mom, Madison and I have been talking," he'd started, and I'd watched Madison's perfectly manicured hand rest on his knee, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light. "We want to get married at the Magnolia Plantation. It's where Madison's always dreamed of having her wedding." I knew the Magnolia Plantation. Everyone in Charleston knew it. It was also $45,000 just for the venue. "That's wonderful," I'd said, meaning it. I wanted my son to be happy. "When are you thinking?" "October 15th, Madison had said, her voice bright and rehearsed. "It's the only date they have available for the next 2 years, and we really don't want to wait." Then came the part I'd been expecting. "The thing is, Mom," Michael had continued, "Madison's parents can contribute about $20,000. They're helping her sister too, and you know, with the economy and everything." He'd trailed off, but I'd known what he wasn't saying. Madison's father was a cardiologist. Her mother ran an interior design firm. The economy wasn't their problem. But I'd also known what Michael was really saying. He wanted me to make up the difference. "How much are we talking about?" I'd asked. Madison had pulled out her phone, showing me a detailed budget that she'd clearly spent weeks preparing. Venue, catering, flowers, photography, band, open bar, wedding favors that cost more per item than I spent on groceries in a week. The total at the bottom had made my stomach clench. $83,000. "We were hoping you could cover 60,000, Michael had said. "I know it's a lot, but Mom, this is my wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And you always said you wanted me to be happy." I'd wanted to say no. I'd wanted to ask why a wedding needed to cost more than a down payment on a house, why they couldn't have something smaller, something meaningful rather than something Instagram-worthy. But I'd looked at my son's face, at the hope there, and I'd thought about the college fund I'd depleted to pay for his degree, the car I'd co-signed for, the security deposit on his first apartment. "Let me think about it," I'd said, and the disappointment on Madison's face had been immediate and sharp. "Mrs. Patterson," she'd said, and I'd noticed she never called me Carol. "We really need to know soon. The venue requires a 50% deposit by the end of next week, and without your help, we'll lose the date." So I'd thought about it for exactly 48 hours before I'd transferred $50,000 from my retirement account, the one I'd been building since I was 23 years old, the one that was supposed to be for traveling someday, for the photography studio I'd always dreamed of opening, and I'd sent it to Michael with a message. "Congratulations. Love, Mom." His response had been quick. "You're the best. Can't wait for you to see everything come together." That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, I'd received exactly 2 text messages from Michael, one asking if I could cover the cost of the bar upgrade because Madison's family is used to top-shelf everything. Another asking if I knew any florists who might give us a family discount because the quote they'd gotten was insane. I'd wired another $5,000 for the bar. I'd called my friend Janet, who did arrangements for the hospital gift shop, even though I'd known Madison would never use her. And I'd told myself this was what mothers did. We sacrificed. We gave. We made our children's dreams possible, but standing in my kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, hearing my son's voice through that accidentally on speakerphone, I'd realized something that should have been obvious years ago. To Michael, I wasn't a person, I was a resource. And to Madison, I was even less than that. "Your mom seems nice," Madison had said, her tone making it clear that nice was not a compliment. "But Michael, we need to talk about the seating chart. My mother is very concerned about the optics." "What optics?" Michael had asked. "Well, your mom is. She's not exactly polished, is she? I mean, She's lovely. But she wore Kmart jeans to dinner last week. Kmart, Michael. And her hair. When's the last time she's been to a real salon? I'd looked down at my jeans. I'd bought them at Kmart because they fit well and I was practical. My hair was cut at Supercuts because I didn't see the point in paying $100 for something that would grow back the same no matter what. Madison, that's my mom you're talking about, Michael had said. But his voice had been weak, placating. I know. And I love that you love her. But my family, they're very particular. My Aunt Constance will be there, and she's friends with the governor's wife. And Michael, I just think it might be better if your mom wasn't at the actual ceremony. The sandwich knife had clattered into the sink. What are you saying? Michael had asked. I'm saying your mom is wonderful and we appreciate everything she's doing. God knows we couldn't afford this without her, but maybe she could just come to the reception? After dinner? For cake and dancing? That way she's included, but she won't be in any of the formal photos, and my family won't have to, you know. Have to what? Have to explain her, Michael. She's not like us. She doesn't know which fork to use. She'll probably want to talk about her job at the insurance company. Or worse, ask people what they do for a living like she doesn't already know they're important. It'll be awkward for everyone. The silence had stretched so long I'd thought maybe Michael would defend me, would tell Madison that I'd raised him alone after his father left, that I'd worked double shifts to keep him in private school, that I'd taught him to read and to ride a bike and to be kind to people regardless of what they did for a living. Instead, he'd said, "Let me think about how to tell her." That's when I'd walked back into the living room, set the plate of sandwiches on the coffee table, and said, very calmly, "You won't need to tell me anything." I heard. Madison's face had gone white. Michael's had gone red. "Mom, it's not. It's exactly what it sounded like," I'd interrupted. "I'm not refined enough for your wedding. I'm an embarrassment. But my money is perfectly acceptable." "Mrs. Patterson, you're taking this the wrong way," Madison had started. "Am I? Then please explain the right way to interpret being told I'm good enough to pay for your wedding but not good enough to attend it." Michael had stood up, reaching for me. "Mom, we're just trying to make everyone comfortable. You'd hate it anyway. It's going to be really formal and stuffy, and you'd be bored." I'd looked at my son, who I'd rocked through nightmares and driven to soccer practice and helped with college essays, and I'd seen a stranger. Or maybe I'd seen who he'd always been, and I'd just been too busy being useful to notice. "I need you both to leave now," I'd said. "Mom, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. You have your venue deposit. You have your bar upgrade. Consider it my wedding gift. But I won't be contributing anything else." "You can't be serious," Madison had said, her voice sharp with panic. "We've already committed to the caterer, the flowers, the photographer. We need that money." "Then I suggest you ask the governor's wife," I'd said. And I'd walked upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door. I'd heard them arguing below, heard Madison's voice rising and Michael's trying to soothe her, heard the front door slam and then Michael's car start, and then silence. I'd sat on my bed for exactly 20 minutes. Then I'd opened my laptop and done something I'd been thinking about for 38 years. I'd booked a 3-week photography workshop in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The kind real photographers went to, with morning light sessions and evening critiques and actual gallery professionals who might look at your work. It cost $11,000, including the hotel and materials. I'd used the money I'd been planning to send for Michael's wedding cake. Then I'd called the bank and put a hold on any transfers over $500 from my account. "I've been the victim of financial exploitation," I'd told the representative. Which wasn't a lie. I need to protect my assets. I'd felt my hands shaking as I'd hung up the phone. I'd felt my heart racing, but I'd also felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Like I was making a choice that was just for me. The phone calls had started that evening. First, Michael, apologetic and wheedling. "Mom?" Madison didn't mean it the way it sounded. "She's just stressed about the wedding. Can we come back and talk?" I'd texted back, "I'm not available. Have a good evening." Then Madison's mother, Patricia, her voice dripping with concern. "Carol, dear, I understand there's been some confusion. Madison tells me you're upset about the seating arrangements. But surely we can work this out like adults?" "There's no confusion," I'd said, "and nothing to work out. I hope the wedding is lovely. But Carol, they're counting on your contribution. You can't just— I can, I'd said. And I have. Goodbye, Patricia. I'd turned my phone off after that and spent the evening going through my old camera equipment. I'd found my Nikon from 1987, the one I'd bought with my first real paycheck and barely used because there'd always been something more important to spend money on. Dance lessons for Michael, school trips, college application fees. The next morning, I'd driven to the camera shop downtown and traded it in for a newer model with all the lenses I'd need for Santa Fe. The young man behind the counter had been enthusiastic and helpful, showing me how to adjust the settings, talking about aperture and ISO like I was someone who mattered, someone whose dreams were worth discussing. You're going to love it, he'd said. Santa Fe has the most incredible light. I'd believed him. For the next 2 weeks, I'd ignored 17 calls from Michael, 43 texts, and a tearful voicemail from Madison about how I was ruining her special day. Patricia had shown up at my door twice. The second time, I'd watched through the window as she'd rung the bell, waited, then left a note that said, "We need to discuss your behavior. This is unacceptable." I'd thrown the note away. Michael had finally appeared on a Saturday morning, letting himself in with the key I'd forgotten he still had. I'd been packing for Santa Fe, laying out hiking boots and sun hats and notebooks for writing down composition ideas. "Mom, what are you doing?" he'd asked, staring at my suitcase. "I'm going to New Mexico on Monday." "You can't go to New Mexico. The wedding is in 6 weeks. I know when the wedding is. I'll be back in 3 weeks. Plenty of time before the reception I'm apparently invited to." He'd sat on my bed, his head in his hands. "Mom, please." I screwed up. Madison screwed up. We both know that. But you can't just abandon us. We've already signed contracts. We'll lose deposits. We'll have to cancel everything. You won't have to cancel. You'll just have to adjust. Have a smaller wedding. Ask Madison's family to contribute more. Get a loan. There are options. Madison's parents already said they won't pay another dollar after this stunt you're pulling. They think you're being manipulative. Manipulative, I'd repeated, tasting the word. I'm manipulative for refusing to pay for a wedding I'm not welcome at? You are welcome. We want you there. At the reception. After dinner. For cake and dancing. So I won't embarrass anyone. He'd flinched. Madison was wrong to say that. She knows it now. She's sorry. Is she sorry she said it? Or sorry I heard it? Michael hadn't answered. That's what I thought. I'd said. I need you to leave now. I have packing to do. Mom, if you don't help us, I don't know what we're going to do. I'd looked at my son and felt that crack inside me widen. You're 28 years old, Michael. You have a master's degree and a job that pays twice what I ever made. You'll figure it out. That's what adults do. He'd left without another word, and I'd listened to his car pull out of the driveway for what I'd thought might be the last time. Santa Fe had been everything the camera shop boy had promised and more. The light there was different, golden and clean, making everything look like it was posing for a portrait. I'd spent my mornings photographing adobe buildings and my afternoons in workshops learning from people who'd spent their lives seeing the world through a lens. Nobody there had known me as Michael's mother, or as someone's retired employee, or as the woman who wore Kmart jeans. I'd just been Carol, the one with an eye for shadow and composition, the one whose landscape shots showed real promise according to the instructor. I'd made friends with 2 other women in the workshop, Diane, a retired English teacher from Vermont, and Susan, a grandmother from Oregon who'd started photography after her husband died. We'd eaten dinner together every night, talking about aperture and our children and the lives we'd lived before we'd decided to live for ourselves. My daughter thinks I'm having a midlife crisis, Susan had said one night over margaritas. I told her this isn't a crisis. It's a correction. I'd liked that. A correction. I'd turned my phone on twice during those 3 weeks. The first time, there'd been 64 messages waiting. I'd scrolled through them, Michael begging, Madison crying, Patricia threatening to sue me for breach of oral contract, and then I'd turned it off again. The second time had been the night before I'd flown home. There'd been one message from Michael, sent that morning. Mom, we canceled the wedding at Magnolia. We're getting married at City Hall next month instead. Just family. Madison's parents are furious, but we don't care anymore. We want you there if you'll come. I'm sorry for everything. I love you. I'd stared at that message for a long time before I'd responded. I'll be there. Love you too. The flight home had been strange. I'd felt different. Sitting in that airplane seat, watching the landscape change from desert to forest to the green of South Carolina. I'd felt lighter, clearer, like I'd left something heavy in New Mexico, buried it in the sand and the sage and the incredible light. Michael had picked me up from the airport. He'd barely recognized me at first. I'd let my hair go silver instead of dyeing it the same medium brown I'd been maintaining for 20 years, and I'd bought new clothes in Santa Fe, linen shirts and turquoise jewelry that I'd never have chosen before. "Mom," he'd said, uncertain. "Hi, sweetheart." We'd driven in silence for a while before he'd spoken. "You look different. I feel different. I really am sorry. About everything. I know. Madison's sorry too. She wants to apologize in person if you'll let her." I'd thought about that. Okay. They'd come to dinner that Sunday, and I'd seen immediately that things had changed with them too. Madison had been quieter, less polished somehow. She'd worn jeans, nice ones, but still, and when she'd apologized, it had seemed real. "Mrs. Patterson, Carol, I was awful to you. I got so caught up in what everyone would think that I forgot what actually mattered. I forgot that you were the one making everything possible. And more than that, you were Michael's mother, the person who made him who he is. I was shallow and cruel, and I'm so sorry. Thank you for saying that," I'd said, and I'd meant it. "The truth is," Madison had continued, "calling off the big wedding was the best thing that could have happened. My parents were controlling every detail, and it wasn't even about us anymore. It was about them showing off. Michael and I just want to be married. Everything else is just noise." We'd had dinner, and I'd shown them photos from Santa Fe, and Michael had looked at my landscapes with something like wonder. "Mom, these are really good. Like, professional good. My instructor thinks I should apply to show at a gallery in Asheville. There's one that features emerging artists over 50. You should do it," Madison had said. Definitely. The wedding at City Hall had been perfect. Just Michael and Madison, Madison's sister, her parents looking uncomfortable but present, and me. We'd gone to dinner afterward at a restaurant downtown, and when the check had come, Michael had reached for it. "I've got this," he'd said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, Mom. You've paid for enough." 2 months later, I'd gotten my first gallery show. 3 of my Santa Fe landscapes had sold, and I'd used the money to book another workshop, this time in Maine. Michael and Madison had come to the opening, and I'd heard Madison telling someone, "That's my mother-in-law. She's an incredible photographer. Not my mother-in-law who paid for things. Not my mother-in-law who we used to be embarrassed of. Just an incredible photographer." That night, I'd stood in the gallery, surrounded by my work, and thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, standing in her kitchen with mayonnaise dripping onto the counter, hearing herself reduced to a checkbook. I'd thought about how close I'd come to just accepting it, to paying for that wedding and showing up to the reception and pretending my heart wasn't broken. But I'd chosen differently. I'd chosen myself, and in doing that, I'd taught my son something more valuable than I'd taught him in all the years of sacrifice. That love shouldn't require you to disappear. That being a mother didn't mean being invisible. That choosing yourself wasn't abandonment, it was survival. I'd enrolled in more photography classes. I'd started selling prints online. I'd even begun teaching a beginner's workshop at the community center for women over 50 who'd always wanted to try something creative but never had permission. "Permission from who?" one of them had asked during our first session. "From ourselves," I'd said. The last time I'd seen Michael and Madison, they'd told me they were expecting a baby. Madison had taken my hands and said, "I want our daughter to grow up knowing her grandmother is someone with her own dreams and her own life. I want her to see that women don't have to shrink themselves to be loved." I'd thought about that a lot since then. About what I was teaching by example now, versus what I'd taught before. About how the best gift I could give my future granddaughter wasn't money or sacrifice, but a model of what it looked like to value yourself. It had been 8 months since that day in the kitchen, and I was planning my 3rd photography trip, this time to Iceland. My retirement account would never fully recover from the money I'd spent on Michael's aborted wedding, but I'd stopped seeing that as a loss. It was the price of my education, the cost of learning that I was more than what I could provide for other people. And anyway, I'd earned more in photography sales than I'd spent on Iceland. That felt like its own kind of wealth. Sometimes late at night, I still thought about that moment when everything had cracked, when I'd realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a person and become just a checkbook. But I didn't regret it anymore. That crack had been necessary. It had let the light in. And once you'd seen yourself in that kind of light, clear and honest, and unforgiving, you couldn't go back to the shadows. You could only move forward, camera in hand, ready to capture whatever came next.